There's so many layers to this.
So many layers.
So where do you guys want to start?
Look, Chuck Todd can't make a good sentence. Brian Williams can't bother to tell the truth more than 15 minutes, like in a row.
I think, Lindsey, you have a sense of how Melissa is behind the scenes, but
I feel guilty over the past 6 to 8 months about any great thing that's happening.
We have Dorian Warren and Melissa Harris Perry. I have been trying to get Melissa to talk to me for so long, and she hasn't talked to any media about anything. She's just like, no. And she's on Who Cares What We Think with Erica and I. So welcome to both of you guys.
Listen, Lindsey, that is the truth. As you well know, I'll talk to you all day on the phone. You and I can text. We can have an email. But I'd never have done media, not for 4 years. And so I was excited to be able to come and talk to you guys today.
Wow.
So you guys are coming out with a new podcast called System Check. We are really checking the system. I think now is a time for that name to make the most sense. Erica and I have been listening to just the trailer, but it's out today. And so I just want you guys to tell us what people can expect.
You can expect some insightful conversation and a political analysis. First and foremost, we're going to be talking about big systems. We're going to talk about criminal punishment system, the policing system. I know we're going to have a conversation about that in a few minutes. The system of our democracy is really the first 2 episodes of the show in terms of our voting systems. How do votes get cast? How do we count votes? What does it mean for outcomes in terms of making our lives better? But we have a whole lot of other ideas on other systems to take a look at. But it's also going to be a show that's fun because we have known each other for drinking age years, and we probably might have a drink or two while we're doing the show. And we can get a little loose and crazy, more so than what people see us, how people see us act in public. I think, Lindsey, you have a sense of how Melissa is behind the scenes, but I have had a sense of her for a long, long time. And so we're just going to be free and unabashed and say all the words.
Yep. And it's funny to hear Dorian talk about it that way, because it is true that the first show, maybe even the first 2, are really pretty serious in tone because, well, we're facing the potential end of our entire democracy. And it seems wrong to be too light and fluffy while we're talking about voting systems and repression. But what we don't want to be, and I think that we're just not, is just sort of either blaming it all on just this moment. So we're trying to bring a perspective that says, things didn't all go to hell in 2016. We had been building, and that the systems have been creating the problems that we currently live in, but also that part of the whole trajectory of Black life in America is, no matter how bad it is, even in the context of intergenerational chattel bondage, Black people made art, we made music, we made families, we made lives, we made things that were beautiful, we adorned ourselves. So there's no moment that doesn't call for our creative expressions of joy and of love and of connection.
We have been talking about this, Lindsey and I, in terms of excellence being the resistance or joy being the resistance. So I appreciate that you're talking about some degree of levity and balance, because I know that myself, I feel guilty over the past 6 to 8 months about any great thing that's happening, because all of our protected pain has really been exposed and we're really going through that motion. So bringing in both of those aspects is so important right now.
Erica, I love the way you framed that. Would you say that again? The protected pain? Say more about that.
Yeah. So I always call it protected pain because we always know as Black people, there are certain degrees of things that we have to deal with on a regular basis, but we generally aren't transparent with that testimony because then people can use that as a weapon against us. So the idea that we're speaking it out in public and demanding equity and equality is really revealing protected pain. And I think that's where a lot of the hemorrhaging is coming from.
That's so helpful. I really love that framework. That's, I think about how I I always sort of hate that moment after a police slaying of an unarmed Black man where the cameras and the mics go into community, into family, and we see the weeping, wailing mother, in part because, as you were pointing out, Erica, it is not in a context. We don't know anything else about her joy, about the years that she nursed that child, about the time she spent teaching him to read, about the work she put in to make sure he'd have a driver's license. All we get is Black mothers over and over and over again in this context of excruciating pain, so much so that we come to think that's what Black motherhood is. Black mothers should expect to lose their children violently. And so that when it happens, we're almost inured to that pain. So I so appreciate that framework and trying to remember that, you know, seeing us being all the rest of who we are is part of the resistance.
I want to ask you guys, because this week with what happened with Walter Wallace Jr., I know you guys have been watching it closely, and for us and you guys both being in media in the past and currently, you see these stories time and time again, and I don't even know what to do because you feel so broken, and we're talking about the same thing over and over again, and your whole show is based upon, is the system broken or was it set up like this? And so how do we move forward? How do we stay hopeful? What would you suggest having more years discussing topics like this, that's some actual resolution?
You know, I have to say, in thinking about Walter Wallace Jr., let's say his name, I have this old Jay-Z Kanye West lyric in my head from Watch the Throne. This was before Kanye really went off the deep end, but Kanye has this line, right? What's the life expectancy for Black guys? The system's working effectively, that's why. And it's just been in my head all day because we've been talking about system check, and I've been thinking about systems. And in this case, right, when you think of our policing system, there is no question that the historiography is very clear about the origins and intentions and design of policing. And it's sort of two dual traditions, one around obviously policing the Black bodies, particularly of fugitive slaves. The other was about putting down worker revolts in big cities. That's the origins of policing in America. And that's the system that we are still living with. Now, having said that, it's really the choice between care, because we know the story of Walter Wallace Jr. it's a mental health story. And we know that the system of policing we could force it and design it to make a different choice that leads to care versus instant death and punishment. And so how do we talk about, let me just say, I am still inspired by what has happened over the summer in terms of the uprisings, the revolt, the engagement of thousands, not actually millions of Black people in this country who have just had enough and have just said no more. And folks are in the streets in the middle of a pandemic. People are voting. People are going to not go home after Election Day. So there's a lot of work to be done, to be sure. But I'm still hopeful in the moment. I like to say, let's mourn and then organize. So we should mourn yet another loss of Black life senselessly by police and state violence. But then we have to go out and organize.
Yeah, and I would, I'd add to it, as I've listened to his family speak, and they said we didn't call the police. We called an ambulance. We understood that our loved one was having a mental health crisis. We called for help, and we got the police instead. And I think about that because it's such a small example. It's a nothing example, right? But so here in North Carolina, where I live, our public schools are still not back in. My husband is the president of the Urban League here. And so one of the big projects he's taken on is this thing called tent tutors. So they put up these big tents in the city parks, and they have the public school kids are coming to these open air tents, and they have tutors from the school system, and the buses are coming and doing the Wi-Fi. So this is a way for young people to get some level of classroom engagement, and especially if they don't have Wi-Fi at home. Overall, it's going great. I mean, just amazing stories of young people and of their caregivers. But in one of the locations, every single morning, he goes out and it's been trashed. Now, they haven't stolen anything. They just like will go and like throw all the, paper around and all the, whatever they can put their hands on. Trashed every morning. So extra work. Now, there's a couple different ways you could address that. One, you can call the police and you can say, we know that sometime between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m., somebody in the community is going to come out and trash this. And so monitor. But you better know that is not what he's done, because we know that making that call, a call that you have a right to make, a call that you ought to be able to make, and you ought to be able to trust that the police would see that these are clearly kids in the context of a quarantine who aren't even really doing serious, it's not like they're doing serious theft or damage. They're just expressing their angst, their pain, right? Whatever that protected pain is that they don't have any other place to put out. But because we can't trust the police whose salaries we pay, instead my husband is installing cameras and then watching all night and then waking up and then driving across town and then trying to catch the kids so that he can talk to them, because we end up in this situation of being in a community where we have no protection from the state. We cannot trust the state to intervene for us, for our families, for our young people with any kind of reasonable discretion. So we are taxed in our time, taxed in our money, taxed in our emotional resources. We're paying triple taxes for zero services. And it just must stop. We absolutely have a right as citizens to something better than this.
How much do you both think that this has to do with or at least the root of it, the intentional misinformation behind the message of defund police? Because I'm thinking, like, my husband and I just got sworn in by a judge as court-appointed special advocates, and one of those
fantastic, Erica.
That's amazing.
That's amazing.
I'm very, like, we're both very excited about this. But there was so much information that we received through our training, and one of them was from a case coordinator who is also a domestic violence liaison officer. And that's where my mind goes to when you're talking about defund police. It's the reallocation of money and resources so that when something goes wrong, whether it's dependency, neglect, domestic violence, mental health issues, you have someone who has either volunteered or spent their life's work really navigating how to come into this situation, and the police are in the background. So I'm wondering if, because we have so much misinformation on defund police, if we're not truly having the conversation of what's possible if we reallocated the funds.
I think we had the conversation has started on what is possible. That's the beauty of defund the police. And if you want to go further, abolish police, right? And people are making all sorts of connections around abolish prisons, et cetera. But it's about defund and then reinvest in what? And what is the vision, the reimagined vision for how those resources can be used? And to go back to Melissa's point about how we're taxed, think of all the money spent on police departments in terms of settlements for wrongful death cases. That is our money in city after city after city. So much so, Wall Street created a special police bond to finance settlement payments over the long term because city governments didn't have the money to pay them out. So what could we do with that? What could we do with the billions of dollars spent to pay out families for wrongful death of Black people every year? Well, there's a whole care economy we might imagine, right? So what are all the necessary services that allow us to care for each other, whether it's mental health or whether it's basic shit in our communities, right? Around, picking up the trash on a regular basis. Those would be good. Those are good jobs, lots of, right? So I do think we are in the midst of this conversation on reimagining, one, what does public safety actually mean and look like? And two, what are the services and necessities that's rooted in a value of care that allows us to not just survive, but to thrive?
And Erica,
I'm excited by that conversation.
and yet, Erica, the one thing I would say is, as excited as I am about it, I'm also really worried about our conversation partners. So you talked about what is it rooted in? And yes, it's in part rooted in a deliberate misinformation, but it's also rooted in a deliberate blindness. Let me not say blindness. It is in a deliberate refusal to see. It's not the inability to see. It is a refusal to see. So in a conversation, you have to presume that you are willing to engage your interlocutor, that you're willing to learn their language, that you're willing to even just to say, you are in fact telling the truth about your own experience. But because in so many well-resourced white communities, you can call the police and you can expect them to behave in some level of humane fashion or reasonable decision-making, it's so difficult if you're unwilling to hear, right, that in fact you cannot do that and what it means for Black communities and brown communities. And let me also just say, a lot of folks don't see our kids as kids. You know, there's all this data that Black boys and Black girls are adultified, right? Are seen as so much older while they're still little babies or like figuring it out teens or quirky, 20 somethings. And instead of seeing them as young people with a right to make all the mistakes and, be all the things that a kid is, they get punished for it. So yes, it's exciting, but I'm also a little cranky about it.
So Tamar Braxton was on Tamron Hall's show, and I want to get to the idea of where she chose to give her exclusive, because I think that's important in itself, talking about protection and expectations. And I know the story is very convoluted, and she's had issues with mental health, and there's also this domestic violence or some type of component in her relationship. But a big part of what she's talking about, and I'm not sure if anyone's hearing her, is the idea of her story and narrative being manipulated in some way and having a persona that she wasn't a part of creating. And at the root of everything, I think that's really what we're talking about.
Go first. You want me to go first?
I was
You
like,
should go for
Erica told me about the story. I was like, there's so many layers to this.
So many layers.
So where do you guys want to start?
I know, that's why I was just waiting, like, and we are beginning where with this? Because there's a lot of places.
So much.
Why don't you start, Dorian? I can certainly speak to, like, hell yeah, go to Tamron, because I worship Tamron, like, more than a little bit. I mean, the level of talent and of ethics that woman, that sister, that reporter, that journalist has, her range, her humanity, I think people can see it. Like, it's so clear. I think they can see it. But if they can't, I just feel like I want to underline it, that she is not regular. She is truly spectacular and special.
Yes. Amen to that. Okay. So I think there's like 4 or 5 elements to this. One is that reality TV life is just a beast, period. 2, privacy is difficult, if not impossible, when you're at that level and come from that family. 3, there's a story here definitely about betrayal and lack of loyalty. And I would say, people are often pressured into telling your business. And sometimes they prove their disloyalty by exposing, right, somebody in their family. 4, there's a little bit of schadenfreude here, right? That old German term, pleasure derived by someone else's misfortune. And I think that's also partly what's going on here in terms of the spectators and the viewers of this family drama, in a sense. So,
I mean, it's what all of reality TV is built on, right? Is exactly that.
Exactly. So that's how I would think about it. I just feel for her, and I want her to go ahead and write her book and tell her story. And you're right, Melissa, I do think it's significant that she chose Tamron Hall in particular to really be able to craft her own narrative and exercise her agency to craft her narrative as opposed to other folks telling the story for her.
Well, and Tamron Hall knows a little something about being in media and having people who should have your back either stand silently by while horrible things happen to you, or to actually participate in that. And so she knows about that disloyalty and how it is often bred in the context of public life. And so there is no question that she has a deep empathy for folks who are experiencing that. And I mean true empathy, not just sympathy. I think the other thing that is, I can't prove it empirically. And so I always kind of draw back from making a public statement that I don't have like clear two standard deviation empirical evidence for. But I do think that the willingness to be disloyal to Black women, and particularly the joy that we experience in watching uppity Black women who think they are somebody brought down, leveled, is particularly brutal. I can remember when Jemele Hill was beginning to go through the horror of being attacked by President Trump, and then the way that ESPN was basically leaving her out to dry. Now, Jemele is living her whole entire best life now, but as it was happening, as she was in the crucible of it, and I'm just sort of watching it unfold, mostly in social media, and there was an actual rally. Like, people came. Color of Change was there. People organized. Folks were like, you know what? We don't even need ESPN if y'all do Jemele wrong. And part of I remember just sitting there weeping and thinking, maybe this is the one moment when Black men and white folks and other Black women will actually bother to save a talented sister, will not just let it be a story and let her go. Because people didn't save Tamron when they should have, and they didn't save me when they should have, and they didn't save a lot of other folks when they should have. And I felt like it was the very fact that it was so powerful and so rare in watching Jemele get some level of support, and then of course we all know that it then ultimately did disintegrate. I think we are just truly willing to let Black women have to just deal with it all on their own. And that's the other part of the story that I see here.
Should we have seen this coming, like to watch Tamar so loudly live this fabulous life? Everything's positive, right? You and I talked a lot about this, Melissa, like everything can't always be good. Are you okay? For real. Do you think we should have maybe saw the signs and be rallying for people prior to them having the big breakdown, or in her case, almost suicide attempt?
I think we just have to know that when we participate in, look, all of us have our guilty pleasures, right? We all participate in the consumption of some things that are not only bad for us, but bad for others. So, you know that if you have all the Apple products, all the Mac products in your house, then you've got some child labor technology in your house. So I'm not trying to suggest that, I say that as I'm speaking to an iMac computer, right? So I don't want to suggest that any of us are like so woke that we're above participation in it. But when we participate in reality television, we are participating in something that is presenting people's lives in purposely warped and deceitful ways. And you just have to know that that will have a cost for them and also likely a cost for you. And so it means in part to me that we have to own our own culpability in it.
I think it's a good segue though. So we just talked about Jemele, and we talked about everything that happened at ESPN. On Red Table Talk this week, Jada and the family had Jemele and Carrie Champion on the show, talking about how they were pit against one another coming in the building, and they just kicked all those doors down and said, nah, we good, we're gonna be friends over here. And I wanted to know kind of your perspective in media. I don't know if it happens to Black men, Dorian, you can let me know, but for Black women specifically, I'm sure you had experiences with this, Melissa. Erica and I have had experiences with this from me joining a job that she was at 2 years prior to I got there, and everyone assumed that we were not going to get along. And so intentionally we went out of our way to get along, right? We're doing this whole podcast. But I want to know what you guys think about that and all that comes with being in the space that there's only one Black person allowed here.
Listen. Listen, I'm going to try not to give all my business a life.
Sure, yes.
But ain't nothing you said right now sounded like a lie in any set of experiences that I have had. But I will also say, I can also say that many, maybe even most Black women, particularly in media who I've worked with, know that game is afoot. And so many purposely push against it. So I think about Gwen Ifill, who was the goddess supreme empress of all things, who didn't need to ever give us like the time of day, but who always went out of her way, especially if she saw young Black women coming up, to give a little advice, to give a little encouragement, to watch a show, to send an email. I think about, Tamron Hall, who, when I talk about how great she is, it's not only because Tamron could absolutely be the morning sweetheart on the Today Show at 8:30 and then come and read you the entire riot act in, her news show in the afternoon, and then do some Dateline kind of thing in the evening, like her range, but also because, Tamron, when everything went down, invited me to her house and we ate food and she told me what she knew and I told her what I knew. And, she gives out her phone number so that if it's going down, you can call. And I think about Joy Reid, who I know a lot of people want to, think of Joy and I as somehow competitive, but all I ever feel about Joy is such great pride, and watching her be the first Black woman with a prime time news show. I mean, I don't want you to watch nothing else. No person watch anything else on any cable news, but turn into Joy every day. So, I think we have to be actively refuse to ever engage that with other sisters, and mostly because, man, there's a lot of mediocre white boys we could talk about. So ain't no Black woman to ever take your spot, because you want to be mad about something, be mad about Ari Melber, be mad about Chris Hayes, be mad about, Chuck Todd can't make a good sentence. Brian Williams can't bother to tell the truth more than 15 minutes, in a row. I mean, I'm mad at some people, but no, look, everybody's sipping tea, but listen, let's just go ahead and call out all the mediocre white boys who are not allowed to fail, no matter how bad they are, and go ahead and say, I'm for everybody who's a Black woman. I'm just for us. I'm for us.
Can I just add in and say,
because this is what I ain't got a job and don't need a job from none of them. So I will call all the little mediocre names.
You're free. You're free. Let me just say, I have experienced in my multiple careers the most amount of generosity from Black women, period. Black men is a different story. And there's a scarcity mindset where it could only be one of us with Black men, some Black men. I've had, but most of my mentors in my life have been Black women, let me just say. And there's just a generosity of spirit, and it's not a competition. Right? Because it comes from a place of both history and a sense of abundance. If you do, our fates are linked. If you are on and you are doing well, then that's good for us, not me. And so I have had some previous colleagues who, some of you will know who I'm talking about, but there could only be one. Mm-hmm. On top, in a majority white system, I'm like, there are two of us in the room. And can we team up? And I was super generous, and I would always be putting them on and putting things. And it was just no, there can only be one. And I was somehow threatening, instead of we could have built something really amazing in terms of the work we were doing together. But having said that, I mean, there is, I do have a group of Black men of who that's my crew.
And they're queer,
practice.
Right?
But yes, that's where I was going. That's where I was going.
Right. So I was it's not all Black men. Queer Black men are down for
yes.
you, for me.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
But the number
Exactly.
of cis straight Black men who, for sisters or for brothers, who can manage to be generous in that way I can name Manning Marable was that way. He was generous. He was good. He was, you know, he never treated you like a daughter or a date. He actually like treated you like some. Listen.
Let me just ask this question. I want to system check this.
Yeah.
Because do you think that the system is built for the competition of scarcity and there can only be one because historically we're only used to none or one? Mm-hmm. Or do you think that that is infighting based on the idea that it took me this much to get here, so I know that you're my competition based on the idea that, you know, well, this is the box that's been checked. So is it the system or is it really like interpersonal communication?
I mean, I am a systems person. So if I'm going to have some intellectual integrity, I will say I do believe systems, rules, norms shape behavior. And so if the system was designed in a different way that encouraged generosity, that encouraged abundance, that encouraged I do think it would change behavior, though an alternative set of systems. There's always going to be personality stuff, right? And you know what? Competition can be fun if it's structured well. We can have some friendly competition as long as we're trying to make each other better. But I do think it's rules and norms that shape that behavior and those scarcity mindsets. So yes, it is. I would give you the system answer to how systems have been designed in ways that we know and ways that we don't know and might be still hidden from us, but we're enacting certain scripts and roles based on these cues from system rules or norms that we don't realize. And then they play out and they do harm people.
I mean, Dorian, just to make the point, when you said we could have healthy competition if there's not a scarcity mindset, even if we're going for a big thing, my mind went immediately to sport, right? So both to collegiate and to professional sport, where Black men can both be supportive and directly in competition with each other, right? Like literally directly competing for a title, for a game. But the presumption isn't that I want you to be injured, that I want you to, that I want you to fail in this deep way. But rather that we, in fact, the better you are, the greater that we can both be. And I think about some of the greatest competitions between men in Black men in sport that have, extended over years and decades and made everyone better. But then we don't have that kind of system, for example, in the academy, which we were talking about, or in media. And again, Erica, I would blame it on systems. And one of the key systems is a system of white supremacy that literally can't tell the difference between Black people. And I don't just mean like, oh girl, don't y'all look just the same, even if you look totally different. But I mean, can't tell the difference. Can't tell the difference between a reporter and an opinion writer. But
can't they tell the difference between light skin and dark skin?
No.
I get added Lindsey Granger all the time.
People literally will find an Erica clip and look at my picture on Twitter and at me and say, "Go girl," and I'm like, "Stop calling me girl." And second of all, I mean, like what?
All the time.
Before,
wow.
Somebody ran up to me like they were so amazed and said, "Did anybody tell you look just like Michelle Obama?" Like they thought it was identical. They thought, and I was like,
wow.
Stop.
I mean, if someone else calls me Van Jones, I'm going to ask.
But somehow, all the Blacks look and sound just alike. And that is white supremacy, and that is a system. And if you make the spot, instead of making it a spot for like, the White House reporter, it's just like the spot for the Black girl, then, there's a White House reporter version of Black girl. There's an opinion writer version of Black girl. There's an investigative reporter version of Black girl. There's an entertainment reporter version of Black girl. There's not just a Black girl spot. That's ridiculous.
I think one thing that we don't talk about is the degree of trust, because I mean, I've never been in a position before where in my entire career, I have been the only Black female in the building. in terms of like being on air or whatever. I'm the only one. So when Lindsey came along, it was like, oh, well, this is exciting. There can be two of us. And we did have two Black men, and they're very different. And it was like, oh, there can be two of us. But then it was the trust. Like and I want people to be very like intentional about this, because I remember having a conversation at NABJ, and I'm like, you really are stronger together. So if you can find a way to really connect, because I don't think anyone should ever just be like, well, we're the same skin tone, so now we're besties. I think that it's important that you connect on some level. And for Lindsey and I, like, we had a real foundation before we came together and did this project together, because I think it would be disingenuous to do it just because we're the two Black girls. So there was more to that relationship.
I think we had to have like specific conversations, like even if it's subtle. I don't know if anybody walked up to Erica and said, don't like Lindsey for these reasons. It's just like, oh, well, when you were coming here are the things that was anticipated from your arrival. And I was like, well, since I'm interviewing, nobody knows me, so let me introduce myself to you. And it became a thing where I automatically, based on her reaction to what she thought I was supposed to be, was like, what's wrong with her? Like, why is the energy not like, welcome, Black girl, let's go? And I was so alarmed because, Melissa, I run in the building like, hey, and I even say when I met Melissa, it wasn't like, how you doing? I thought we were going to be besties right away because my cousin was in her school, and she was like, cool, you seem like you'll be great for the job. And now, years later, a decade later, I can call her and say anything, but it didn't start like that. And I actually appreciate those relationships a lot more. That are not just based on, okay, let's pretend on air, let's turn it off air.
In movement circles, there's a saying, you can only move at the speed of trust. And it's everything to me. And then, it's lonely also being the only one. So why would you actually want to be the only one? Like, why wouldn't you want just company to hang out, to have fun, because you know what I mean? This shit is hard. It's really, really hard. So why wouldn't you want to struggle through it with someone instead of trying to be a gatekeeper?
And what I love about that, Dorian, is that when you frame it as loneliness, because the other thing that happens is, oh, I'm fine not being the only one as long as I'm on top and everyone else is below me. But the idea of the speed of trust and of loneliness is like, the only thing that eases loneliness is actual companionship, actual friendship, actual, colleague relationship. It's so funny to hear you talk about it, Erica, and think about Lindsey. So I know Lindsey better just because I've known her longer. And I know her to be both so gregarious and open and giving and loving, but also like prepared to just straight up step all the way back. Be like, oh no, and so I can imagine in any, and I don't mean that just about Black women. I mean, just even sort of her reporter instinct, right? That is both willing to open and let in, but also reserved enough to set clear boundaries when necessary. But it takes time and vulnerability, right? Being willing to get your feelings hurt and keep moving forward.
Well, I want to thank you guys so much for coming on. I think you guys have both been very vulnerable and taught me so much. I'm sure you taught the world so much just by following and watching. I say as far as boldness, Melissa taught me a whole lot. So I'm just
but that's about systems too, right? I can be bold because I have tenure and I don't need none of these jobs and they don't pay me much of anything anyway. So like, it's not like
Lindsey. I understand.
Yeah, if you need your job for your mortgage, you got to do what you got to do, and nobody's judging. Yeah.
And I just want to thank you guys, though, honestly, for coming on. I really appreciate it. I know you guys don't do many interviews, but I mean, from when I first started my career, I followed you both, and you taught me so much, like I said. And Erica and I are really honored to have you guys on today.
I'm honored to be on with both of you, Lindsey and Erica. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And Erica, I'm so happy to learn that you're also Chicagoan, so represent Second City.
Chi-town homies are the craziest.
I can't even, I just have to sit here.